She did not mean to raise her voice at her daughter, not over a forgotten backpack. The words came fast and sharp, sharper than the moment required. Afterward, the kitchen went quiet, and something heavier than guilt settled in her chest. She had slept enough, the morning had been ordinary, and still the flash of anger arrived before thought could catch up. The question that lingered had nothing to do with the backpack, and everything to do with where that surge came from. Irritability often announces itself this way, a reaction that outraces the situation, a spark where no fire should be. We commonly treat it as a surface emotion, a sign that we need more rest or less caffeine. And sometimes that first explanation is enough. But when irritability becomes a frequent visitor, it may be doing something far more important than signaling a bad night of sleep. It may be carrying information the conscious mind has not yet found words for. Understand what that information might be. Start with the moment the voice rises when it should not. An ordinary request, a small interruption, or an unanswered message can suddenly feel like a demand that cannot be tolerated. The obvious answer is that the person is simply stressed. Stress does narrow the window of tolerance, making ordinary friction feel sharper. So, if exhaustion does not fully explain it, we need a more precise question. Not why am I irritable, but what might the irritability be protecting or communicating? One of the most reliable findings in emotion research is that emotions carry adaptive signals. Fear signals possible danger. Sadness signals loss that asks for pause, and anger signals a boundary that has been crossed. Irritability can be understood as a quieter, more frequent cousin of anger, a low-grade boundary alarm. But the boundary in question is often not the one that just got bumped in the kitchen. The real boundary may have been worn down hours or days earlier in a dozens small ways the person did not consciously register. Think of a day filled with unspoken interruptions, each one too minor to object to, but collectively pulling at the same internal seam. By evening, a child's question about homework feels like an intrusion because internal space has already been used up without permission. Return to the woman in the kitchen and notice what happened earlier. Her morning had begun with a message from a colleague that required more emotional effort than she acknowledged. Her attention had been pulled in too many directions, and no one had actively given her quiet time to think. By the time the backpack was forgotten, she was already defending a territory she had not named. Her need for a moment of unclaimed attention. Irritability in this light is not a random emotional spike, but an accumulation signal. Psychologists sometimes describe this as the difference between an emotion that reacts to the present trigger and an emotion that draws from all the unresolved triggers still simmering underneath. The trigger is the backpack. The cause is the slow erosion of personal space that began hours before. One mechanism that helps explain this accumulation is what researchers call allostatic load. Allostatic load refers to the wear and tear on the body and mind from repeated cycles of stress without adequate recovery. When that load builds, the nervous system stays in a more vigilant state, scanning for threats even in safe situations. A question asked in a neutral tone can sound demanding when the listener's system is already operating near its ceiling. This means the irritability is not imaginary, and it is not overreacting from sheer pettiness. It is a genuine physiological and psychological state that biases perception toward detecting conflict. But there is a second mechanism at work, one that involves what the person values. Irritability often surfaces when an action or request threatens a value the person holds, but has not consciously protected. For the woman in our story, the value was autonomy, the quiet ability to move through her morning at her own pace. That value had been chipped away by too many demands, none of them dramatic, all of them intruding. The irritability was not a personality flaw. It was a lagging indicator that something she cared about had been consistently ignored. Research on emotion regulations suggests that naming the underlying concern reduces the intensity of reactive emotion. But naming requires a pause that irritability itself often short-circuits. The feeling arrives with such speed that it hijacks reflection and demands action before understanding catches up. And here we find a painful irony. The very signal that is supposed to alert a person to an unmet need often pushes others away, making the need harder to meet. The daughter feels the sharp tone and withdraws. The partner becomes defensive. And the irritable person is left with both the original exhaustion and fresh guilt. So the signal intended to protect autonomy can end up increasing isolation. That isolation then adds another layer of strain, making future irritability more likely. This does not mean the irritability is wrong or bad. It means the signal is crude, useful in its raw form but costly when unexamined. Some studies in occupational health psychology find that irritability rises when people experience low control combined with high demands. That combination creates a sense of being trapped, and trapped nervous systems often sound their alarm through irritation at small things. What looks like a disproportionate reaction to a minor frustration may be a predictable response to days of low autonomy. The same level of irritability that signals burnout in one person may signal something else for another. Grief working its way through, an undiagnosed sleep script problem, or even side effects of a medication. This is why no single explanation will capture every case, and why listening to the signal requires patience rather than a quick label. The danger of oversimplifying is that people may dismiss the signal as mere bad mood, or worse, as proof that they are simply disagreeable. When a person believes irritability is a fixed trait, they stop asking what the moment is asking of them. Now return to the moment after the sharp words, the quiet kitchen heavy with aftermath. If the woman in our story interprets her outburst as proof that she is a short-tempered person, she will carry shame. Shame will make her less likely to examine the drained morning, the unsaid no, the need for quiet that went unclaimed. She will apologize for the tone, but miss the information the tone carried. But if instead she can ask, what boundary was already worn thin before I spoke, the guilt transforms into curiosity. Curiosity opens a different path, not toward blaming the trigger, but toward understanding the history of the reaction. Psychologists who study emotional awareness find that people who can distinguish among different emotional states show more resilient responses to stress. They are less likely to be ambushed by their own emotions because they read the early drafts, not just the final explosion. Irritability, then, can be reframed as an early draft of anger, a draft that signals something needs attention before it becomes a larger rupture. The central reversal is this: the irritation that feels like an enemy may be the only messenger willing to travel from the unspoken need to conscious awareness. It does not deliver a perfectly worded message, but it reliably shows where the pressure has built. And the pressure often builds not where the person is weak, but where they have been strong for too long without replenishment. This does not excuse hurtful words or give permission to lash out. It instead explains the origin of the impulse in a way that makes regulation possible. Understanding that irritability is a signal reduces the shame that keeps the signal unread. The deepest insight may be that irritability is often a form of emotional stop signal. It flares when the mind detects that continuing in the same way will cost more than the person can afford. In the kitchen, the stop signals arrived seconds too late for silence, but exactly in time to reveal that something was no longer sustainable. What was being signaled was not that the child had failed, but that the adult had been running an internal system of overextension for hours. That overextension had been invisible to her while she moved through the morning, but it was visible to her nervous system all along. Irritability did not create the problem. It revealed a problem that had already been accumulating in silence. This reframing changes what a person does after the flare. Instead of promising to be more patient and leaving the underlying pattern untouched, they can ask what the signal was protecting. Perhaps the signal was protecting the last sliver of uninterrupted thought, or the right to say no without explanation, or the simple bodily need for a minute of stillness. Once that protected value is named, the person can begin to negotiate for it before the pressure becomes explosive. This does not instantly remove irritability from life, but it turns the experience from a mysterious failure into a decipherable communication. And communication, once deciphered, can be answered with small, concrete changes. A few minutes of quiet in the morning, a boundary communicated gently before it gets trampled, a request for help that arrives early instead of late. These small adjustments do not require a personality transplant. They require listening to the early signals before they become a crisis. Socially, this shift also changes how we respond to irritability in others. Seeing someone's sharp tone as a possible signal of overload does not excuse unkindness, but it can reduce the urge to retaliate. It can open a question instead of a counterattack. Is something being worn away that I cannot see? This is not the same as absorbing mistreatment. It is about recognizing that the surface behavior may not contain the whole cause. Return one final time to the quiet kitchen. The same sharp words hang in the air, but the meaning has changed. The outburst is no longer a simple loss of control. It is a gauge that was ignored too long. The daughter still feels the sting, and that matters. But the mother now knows that her own depletion set the stage. Knowing that does not erase the moment, but it does offer a direction that guilt alone never provided. And perhaps the most humane insight is that our most unwelcome emotions are not invaders, but signals sent from the parts of us that still hope to be understood.